So the last time we talked about the Halloween franchise here on the channel, we talked about Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. The one time that the creators of this franchise decided to try to veer away from Michael Myers and instead try to make the Halloween franchise an anthology series with each new installment being its own Halloween tale. And after a fairly adamant negative response from viewers after wanting to see Michael Myers in that third film, they decided to bring him back, and we're going to be talking about that movie where Michael Myers returns. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video, and in today's video we're going to take a trip back to 1988 for Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers. Directed by Dwight H. Little and starring people like Donald Pleasance, Danielle Harris, Ellie Cornell, George P. Wilbur, and many more, The Return of Michael Myers is exactly that, The Return of Michael Myers. So if you guys are just now hopping onto my reviews of the Halloween franchise, I mentioned in my previous Halloween video for Halloween 3 that I wanted to do a little catching up, as I originally covered the 2 Rob Zombie films, then I covered the original 2 films, and I have covered the 3 latest films that were part of the new timeline that erased the other films. But I hadn't gone back and covered all of the other films that came out throughout the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. So we're going to continue that on now with the 4th installment in the series, Return of Michael Myers, The Return of Michael Myers, the 4th installment. And as I mentioned in the intro, after the adamant negative response that third film got from not having Michael Myers, they chose to bring the character back as a returning threat and a returning slasher, like most of the other slasher characters, standing right next to characters like Freddy Krueger and Chucky, as well as characters like Jason and so many others that we've gotten at this point that continue to return no matter how much they've been brutally destroyed. And so here we are with the 4th film in the franchise, where right out of the gate we learn that Laurie Strode, played by Jamie Lee Curtis, dies off camera. She died in between the events of the 2nd film, which is where we last saw her, and this 4th film. And we learned that she ended up having a daughter who she left behind, who is now in a foster home. This young girl is played by Danielle Harris, who would return later on in the franchise for the 2 Rob Zombie films, playing the closest friend to the Laurie Strode in those films. So it's nice to see her return into the franchise. I always thought that was a fun Easter egg to have her come back into the franchise. And yeah, this is a straightforward Halloween film. Michael Myers is back, and you know, they're transferring him. He ends up breaking out of the transfer. Of course, it's always a bad idea to transfer him to get him on the road. They've done that tons of times at this point, where Michael Myers is at one institution. He was completely fine and everybody was safe with him being there, and they choose to transfer him, which ends up leading to him killing everybody that was in the vehicle that was transferring him, and now he's on the loose, killing everybody. But this time around, he learns that he has a niece, and he's most notably going after her. So he ends up going after his niece, trying to find where she is, goes back to his original hometown, and throughout the course of the movie, you have Donald Pleasance returning as Dr. Loomis to try to stop evil, to try to stop the shape known as Michael Myers. And that's pretty much the movie here. It's a pretty straightforward Michael Myers film. You know, he goes around, he kills people throughout the course of the film. By no means does this have some top tier kills in the franchise, but there are some fun slasher moments for sure, and some of that cheesy late 80s horror charm that you come to expect from these kind of movies. Now, this is a movie that I watched with my fiance this time around for her very first time, and for me was probably my 10th, 15th, who even knows at this point. This is a movie I have a lot of nostalgia for, as I used to watch it countless times when it used to play on TV, especially around the Halloween season and anywhere around October. I used to love when they would do runs of all of the Halloween films on TV, and this was always one that, at least visually, was one I always remembered as I grew up, most notably with having Danielle Harris's young character, Jamie, who's dressed as a clown similar to Michael Myers in that original film. And when it comes down to the overall narrative, there isn't really an abundance to say. Jamie learns that Michael Myers is free and that he's after her. The people around her, her foster family, do what they can to try to protect her. And along the way, Michael Myers destroys a bunch of people and kills a bunch of people, just as you would expect, as Michael Myers would do. Donald Pleasance, of course, is in the mix, telling everybody that he's super evil and that they need to destroy him and that they're a bunch of dumbasses for, not taking the proper action, and that if we don't do what needs to be done, that Michael Myers will wreak havoc as he once did before. And that is essentially Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers. It's a pretty safe, straightforward slasher film with Michael Myers at the center. Now, the question is it a good time? And I think it's really going to be dependent on what you want out of a movie like this. I don't think that a lot of these Halloween films in general are necessarily great films. As somebody who, as I said on the channel many times before, is a huge fan of horror slashers, especially the cheesy ones of the 80s and 90s, I have a nostalgic place in my heart for this movie, and so I do enjoy this film, and going back and revisiting it, even for where it's cheesy, for where it's dumb, for where there's bad performances, for where there's bad line delivery, where there's bad dialogue in and of itself, and some pretty stupid kills, I still have fun with it because it's kind of one of those movies that I can just kind of have a laugh at the things that don't work, at the things that are so late 80s, and at the things that are just so over the top that you can't help but just have a laugh at how ridiculous it is. However, I watched it with my fiance, as I mentioned, and she didn't love it. As soon as the movie was over, she was like, yeah, that sucked. And me, on the other hand, who has nostalgia for it, I enjoyed it a lot more. So I do think that that's something that you got to kind of take into account when it comes to a movie like this, because it's just really going to depend on your personal taste. Which is where I want to go ahead and ask the question to you guys. What do you guys think about Halloween 4? Is it a movie you like? Is it a movie you not like? Whatever the case may be, go ahead and type those comments down below. Now, what I really enjoy about this film is our lead character, Jamie, played by Danielle Harris. I think for a young actress, she gives a pretty solid performance, a little bit annoying at times and a little bit aimless in her choices at times, but I think when it comes down to child performances in horror films, she's definitely one from my childhood that stands out. Child performances in horror films can be creepy for sure, or be something that you can definitely latch onto, but when it comes to making the main character or the person who's running from our main threat a young child, a lot of times, especially when you go back to the 80s and 90s, it can be pretty weak. And while I don't think Danielle Harris gives a fantastic performance here, I do think she gives a compelling enough performance, and there are some great moments in her performance overall that definitely evoke a lot of emotion within herself and make it believable. Now, of course, she is surrounded by a movie that is totally late 80s and it's totally cheesy, totally just straightforward slasher cheese, and so you kind of have to take everything I'm saying with a grain of salt to an extent, because it's all going to be dependent upon whether or not you're able to enjoy this film or not. By no means does this live up to the height of the first Halloween film. I don't necessarily even think the second Halloween film is that great of a film. I think it's rather slow, to be completely honest, and then the third film is just its own thing. But I still enjoy this film as a cheesy slasher of its time. I don't think it necessarily stands out as a fantastic film, but I do think it's worth watching if you're running through the series. Where I feel like this movie does shine is in its cheesy slasher moments, in some of those kills that Michael Myers gives us over the course of the film. And of course, it has that iconic ending where the young girl Jamie, after surviving everything with Michael Myers in this film, ends up deciding to be a killer and decides to, end the movie by killing somebody. And those are probably the most notable things to say about this film. Something else I also think is hilarious about this film is Michael Myers' mask, as it's nowhere even close to the mask that was used in the first two films. And that's something that we would consistently see over the course of this franchise, or certain installments where the mask and its quality is just incredibly weak in comparison to other films in the franchise. The mask in this film is kind of laughable. There are moments about the way he looks in it that is in no way, shape, or form creepy in any way. Whereas the mask that was utilized in the first two films, that specific design, that William Shatner mask that they painted white, is just eerie and creepy, and in the right lighting, it definitely evokes that creep factor that you need from Michael Myers. And that mask, that iteration of the mask, is just far more compelling to look at than the mask that you see in this film and in some of the sequels that would follow this. Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers. The best part about it is that Michael Myers is back. I really do enjoy Danielle Harris in this film as young Jamie, running away from Michael Myers over the course of the film. But when it comes down to performances or dialogue or anything like that, there's nothing substantial here. But as a fan of cheesy, just dumb horror films of their time, I think there's definitely some fun to be had here, without a doubt. So that's going to be my thoughts on Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers. Not a fantastic film, but definitely a worthwhile film, if you will, in the franchise that I'm nostalgic for. It's definitely a movie of its time. I think a lot of people today would watch it and not love it, but I do think that there's some fun to be had there if you watch it knowing that you're going to watch a dumb slasher film. So I'm looking forward to covering the rest of the films. We'll be covering the 5th installment in the franchise very soon, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video. So leave your comments down below. Did you guys like Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers? Or do you think that Michael Myers should have stayed dead in the second film? Whatever your thoughts are, leave any and all comments down below, and I'll see you beautiful people in the next one. Bye-bye.